The Count was having dinner with his fiancée and her family when the cook begged him to leave there. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. The chandeliers glowed softly above the long oak table, but the light did little to warm the air. The Beaumonts sat in rigid elegance, their postures straight, their smiles perfectly measured. Count Julian Darcy tried to match their composure. Though his spirit felt heavier with every passing minute, he lifted his wineglass when prompted, nodded at the appropriate remarks, and answered politely whenever Clara's father addressed him. Yet the entire evening felt rehearsed, as though he were reciting lines to a play he had never auditioned for. Clara Beaumont sat beside him, beautiful in the quiet, polished way of women trained to perfection. Her gown shimmered. Her voice carried the exact softness expected of a future countess. She smiled each time he looked at her, but something in her eyes seemed to be elsewhere, fixed on a future she had already accepted, but he could not yet see. He wondered whether she sensed his unease or merely expected him to hide it. Across the table, her mother adjusted a silver spoon as though the placement of utensils reflected the order of the world itself. Her father spoke proudly of new ventures, of land improvements, of beneficial alliances. The words flowed smoothly, and Julian tried to listen, but beneath the elegant conversation, a strange silence pulsed. It was polite but tense, predictable yet fragile. A footman refilled the glasses. The servants moved in quiet rhythm, and still something felt wrong. Julian could not say why, only that the dinner, meant to mark the final step toward marriage, felt strangely like an ending rather than a beginning. He lifted his gaze toward the tall doors that separated the dining hall from the kitchen. A shadow stood there, a small figure, stiff, watching. Marguerite. She should not have been anywhere near the dining hall. The servants had strict instructions to stay out of sight during such gatherings. Yet she remained frozen by the doorway, her apron stained with wine from the earlier rush, her breath unsteady. Her eyes were wide with something he could not decipher from across the room. Fear? Urgency? Shame? The footman beside her whispered for her to leave, but she did not move. Instead, she clutched the wooden frame of the door as though needing its support. Julian straightened slightly. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Clara noticed his distraction. She leaned closer. "Is something the matter?" Julian tried to answer, but the young cook stepped forward in that moment. Every knife and fork fell silent. The servants halted mid-motion. The Beaumonts turned their heads in offended disbelief. Marguerite walked as though each step fought against terror itself. Clara's mother's voice cut the air. "Young lady, this is hardly your place." Marguerite swallowed hard. She glanced at Julian, her hands trembling visibly. "Forgive me," she whispered to him, "but I must speak, only to you." The room froze. Clara gasped softly, scandalized by the boldness. Her father stiffened. Every face turned toward the cook who dared to break the boundary no servant ever crossed. Julian's voice came out calm, though he felt the tension rising around him. "What is it?" Marguerite's throat tightened, her voice barely carried. "My lord, you must leave. Now." The words did not shout. They did not echo. They simply struck the table like a quiet crack through glass. Clara's father pushed back his chair. "This is absurd. Remove her at once." But the footman hesitated. Everyone hesitated, because Marguerite's fear was not theatrical. It was raw, unfiltered, the kind that came from truth rather than imagination. Julian felt the hair rise on his arms. Clara's mother narrowed her eyes. "Girl, you will explain yourself immediately." Marguerite's breath quickened. I cannot speak here, madam." Clara stood abruptly. "Then you should not speak at all." The tension rose like a taut string. Julian slowly placed his napkin on the table. "Let her speak." The statement silenced Clara. It silenced the entire room. Marguerite tried to bow, though her knees wavered. "Please, my lord," she whispered again, voice breaking. "Leave this room at once." The Beaumonts erupted at once. "This is an outrage." "Julian, control your staff. This girl must be dismissed immediately." Marguerite flinched at every word. She cast a desperate glance toward Julian, pleading without daring to repeat herself. Her hands clasped together tightly, as though she held her courage there. Julian rose from his seat, not entirely certain why. Perhaps it was the sincerity in her eyes, perhaps the strain that shook her voice, perhaps the feeling he'd had since the start of the evening that something beneath the polished surface had begun to crack. Clara reached for his sleeve. "Julian, do not indulge this nonsense." He looked at her gently. "Allow me a moment." Her hand fell away. Marguerite stepped aside, motioning toward the corridor, as though fearing even that gesture might condemn her. Julian walked toward her, every step watched by the Beaumonts with a mixture of indignation and curiosity. Clara's father muttered something about impropriety. The mother exchanged a look that was both triumphant and annoyed, as though she had expected Julian to falter eventually, but not like this. Marguerite's voice shook as they reached the threshold. "Not here," she whispered. "Please." Julian studied her face. She looked pale, terrified, but unwavering. He followed her into the corridor. The door closed behind them, muffling the offended murmurs of the dining hall. The corridor smelled faintly of baked bread and warm broth, a stark contrast to the polished chill of the dining room. Marguerite clutched her apron again, as though trying to keep her hands from trembling too visibly. "Marguerite," he said softly, "tell me what has happened." She glanced behind him to ensure no one was listening. "My lord, you must leave this house tonight." His brow furrowed. "Leave? Why? What danger could possibly—" "No danger," she cut in quickly, fearing the implication. "Nothing of that kind. Only something is being arranged. Something about you. Something they do not want you to know." He stared at her. "You heard something." She nodded, breath shallow. "I should not have. I was not meant to be there. I dropped a tray, and while I was cleaning it, I heard voices from the alcove near the cellar door. Monsieur Beaumont and Madame Beaumont. And your name. Over and over." Julian's gaze sharpened. "What did they say?" "I do not understand all the words they used," she admitted, cheeks reddening with shame. "They spoke of land, and contracts, and influence. They said the engagement would fix everything. But then Madame said that once the marriage was done—" She hesitated. "Yes?" Julian said quietly. "They said you would not be allowed to interfere, that others would guide your estate. They spoke as if you were only a symbol, nothing more." Julian felt a chill of recognition. He had sensed similar tones before, wrapped in pleasantries, but hearing it from someone who had no reason to twist the truth unsettled him. Marguerite lowered her eyes. "I know I do not understand such matters. I know this may mean nothing, but the way they spoke, my lord, it frightened me, as if they planned everything without your knowing." Julian exhaled slowly. "You risked a great deal by telling me this." "I know," she whispered, "but I could not keep silent. Not when it concerns your future. You have always been kind to us servants. I could not let them—" She stopped, afraid to say more. Before he could speak, a soft voice pierced the air behind them. "Julian?" Clara stood at the end of the corridor, her pale blue gown trailing behind her like a wave of silk. Her expression was unreadable, and her eyes drifted from him to Marguerite with a slow, steady suspicion. "What," Clara said gently, "is the meaning of this?" Clara walked toward them with a measured pace, the soft sound of her slippers echoing through the narrow corridor. She stopped only a few steps away, keeping her expression composed, though her eyes carried a sharp glint. Julian felt Marguerite stiffen beside him, her hands tightening around her apron as if bracing for a storm. "I asked," Clara repeated more calmly, "what the meaning of this is." Julian answered first. "Marguerite wished to speak with me. It seemed important." Clara's gaze shifted to the young cook. "Important? To speak privately with my fiancée during a formal dinner?" The question was delivered softly, but the underlying tension made Marguerite shrink back. Julian stepped slightly forward, trying to soften the moment. She was distressed. I thought it best to hear her out. Clara tilted her head as if trying to determine whether she believed him. "Distressed enough to interrupt a dinner meant to formalize our family's alliance." Marguerite found her voice, though it trembled. "Forgive me, mademoiselle. I meant no disrespect. I only thought the Count should know." Clara raised a hand, silencing her. "I did not address you." Marguerite lowered her gaze immediately. Julian felt a flicker of irritation rise in his chest, though he kept it contained. He knew this situation could easily worsen, if not handled gently. Clara turned back to him. If there was something that required your attention, a footman could have been sent. A servant barging into a dining hall is not only improper, it is disruptive. Julian nodded, and yet her urgency seemed genuine. Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. May I ask precisely what she said that you found so urgent? Julian hesitated. Marguerite's warning echoed in his mind. Not here, not before them, not where every word could be overheard and twisted. He could not risk repeating what she had told him in front of hallway walls. It was a private matter, he said instead, keeping his tone neutral. Clara studied him for a long, uncomfortable moment. The corridor felt tighter, the air heavier. She finally exhaled and softened her expression, adapting a gentler approach. Julia, if something troubles you, you need only tell me, she said. There should be no secrets between us. Marguerite flinched lightly, as though the words touched something fragile inside her. Julian noticed but forced himself to remain steady. It is nothing for you to worry about, he replied. Let us return to dinner, and we can speak later. Clara smiled, but it was a careful smile, not a warm one. Very well, but I will expect an explanation. She glanced once more at Marguerite, and though she said nothing, the message was clear. Shall we? She asked Julian. He nodded and followed her back toward the dining hall. Marguerite remained in the corridor, breathing unsteadily as the door closed between her world and his. Inside the dining hall, the Beaumonts had resumed polite conversation, but their eyes shifted toward Julian the moment he entered. Clara's father lifted his glass with an exaggerated smile. Everything settled, I trust? Julian returned to his seat, composed. Yes, a misunderstanding. Nothing more. Clara's mother offered a delicate nod, though her gaze lingered on him a fraction too long, as if measuring his sincerity. The conversation resumed, but the atmosphere had changed. The earlier tension had deepened into something heavier, something expectant. Julian attempted to focus on the conversation, but his thoughts drifted toward the young cook standing alone in the corridor. Her voice, her trembling hands, her insistence. It all troubled him more than he wanted to admit. She had no reason to lie, no ambition to gain, and yet she had risked everything to deliver a warning he now felt foolish for ignoring. Clara leaned toward him again. You are unusually quiet, she murmured. I have much on my mind, he replied. Then allow me to ease it, she suggested, trying to recover her earlier warmth. After dinner we can walk in the garden, alone. It will give us space to speak freely. He nodded, though his heart felt heavy. The dinner continued. Each course felt like an ordeal. Conversations revolved around wedding plans, guest lists, and the merging of families. Julian answered when required, but he felt increasingly detached, as though he were watching the scene from a great distance. In the kitchen, Marguerite's situation was unraveling rapidly. The door had barely shut behind Julian when the head housekeeper stormed toward her. What were you thinking? She hissed. Interrupting a formal dinner? Staring at the guests as though you were one of them? Marguerite lowered her head. Madame, I meant no harm. You only overstepped your position in a way that could cost you your place here. The woman's voice was not cruel, only frightened. Do you understand what you've done? The Beaumonts will not forget this. The other servants stared in shocked silence. Some whispered, others shook their heads. Marguerite felt each glance like a stone settling on her chest. She had known the consequences might be severe, but the reality was harder than she imagined. I had to warn him, she whispered. It felt wrong not to. The housekeeper sighed, rubbing her temple. Whether you are right or wrong is not the issue. You put yourself in danger, and you may have put all of us in danger. If the Beaumonts demand your dismissal, there is little the Count can do. Marguerite pressed a hand to her chest. A shaky breath escaped her. I am sorry. Truly. Then pray it is enough, the housekeeper replied, because a servant's apology rarely reaches noble ears. Marguerite returned to her work, though her hands barely obeyed her. She moved like someone trying to stay invisible, trying not to let her fear show. But everyone could see it. The room vibrated with tension each time a footman passed with dishes headed toward the dining hall. Every step felt like a countdown toward an unknown fate. Back in the dining room, Clara's mother rose from her seat and requested a private word with Julian. Her smile was serene, unmarred by the earlier chaos, though her eyes carried an unsettling calm. Of course, Julian said, rising politely. Clara gave him a reassuring nod, though Julian could not decipher whether she felt relieved or suspicious. Clara's mother led him to a smaller drawing room adjacent to the hall. The moment the door closed, the polite mask slipped just slightly, enough to reveal something sharper beneath. "My dear Count," she began, "I trust you recognize the seriousness of what occurred tonight." Julian folded his hands behind his back. A servant panicked. "It happens. Seldom in noble homes," she corrected gently. "Such behavior must be discouraged. It disrupts order. It invites chaos." Julian held her gaze. "She meant well. Intentions do not matter," she replied. "Only outcomes. And I cannot help but wonder what prompted such an outburst. Surely you understand how inappropriate it is for servants to believe they may intrude on matters far above their station." Julian remained silent. Clara's mother continued, "You are to be a member of our family. Your reputation must remain impeccable. It will reflect on all of us." "Are you suggesting my reputation is harmed by hearing a servant's concern?" he asked quietly. "I am suggesting," she said with a thin smile, "that you should be careful whom you choose to listen to." Her words lingered like a warning disguised as advice. Julian inclined his head politely. "I appreciate your concern. However, I am capable of deciding which matters require my attention." Clara's mother held his gaze for several seconds longer, then nodded. "Very well, let us return to dinner." They exited the drawing room. Julian followed her, though unease curled tightly in his chest. Her tone, her expression, her implied authority, everything confirmed what Marguerite had whispered. When Julian returned to the table, Clara looked at him with quiet expectancy. He offered a small reassurance, but she seemed uncertain. The dinner resumed, though no longer with the same forced charm. The Beaumonts' smiles had stiffened, and the servants moved with anxious precision, hoping not to draw attention to themselves. Marguerite worked silently in the kitchen, trying to steady her breathing. Her fear for Julian had been replaced by fear for herself. Her place at the chateau had never felt secure, but now it felt like thin ice cracking beneath each step. As she placed a tray on the service counter, she heard soft murmurs around her. "She spoke to him alone," a maid whispered. "Did you see the look on Madame Beaumont's face?" another asked. "She'll be dismissed before morning," a footman predicted. Marguerite said nothing. She simply wiped her hands on her apron and continued working, though her thoughts raced ceaselessly. Dinner finally ended. The guests rose. The Beaumonts exchanged farewells with rehearsed politeness. Clara walked Julian to the corridor and spoke softly about future plans. He answered gently, aware that every word mattered more now than before. When Clara rejoined her parents, they stepped outside toward their carriage. Julian stayed in the corridor a moment longer, listening to the distant clatter of their departure. He turned, intending to return to his chambers, when he noticed a faint movement beside the shadowed doorway. Marguerite stood there, unsure whether she had the right to speak to him again, but unable to walk away. Her voice trembled as she bowed her head. "My lord, I beg your forgiveness. I may have caused you trouble." Julian shook his head. "You showed courage, nothing more." She looked up in surprise. "But they are angry. I fear they may turn against you, and against me." "I will handle it," he assured her. "But first, I need you to tell me everything you heard, exactly as you heard it." Marguerite hesitated. "All of it?" "All of it," he repeated. She swallowed hard. "Then I should begin near the cellar door." That was where they spoke. Julian nodded. "Tell me." Marguerite clasped her hands again. "Monsieur Beaumont said the contract would be ready within days, that once you signed it, the estate would no longer be your burden. Madame replied that after the wedding you would step aside willingly, whether you realized it or not." Julian's jaw tightened. "They said you were kind," Marguerite continued softly, "but misguided. That someone else must guide your lands, someone they chose." Julian's breath stilled. Marguerite added, barely above a whisper, "And they laughed after they said it." Julian closed his eyes briefly. "I see." Marguerite feared she had gone too far. "My lord, forgive me. Perhaps I misunderstood. Perhaps I—" "No," he interrupted gently. "You understood enough." He wanted to say more, but a sudden shift in the shadows made him pause. Someone stood at the far end of the corridor, watching them without moving, without speaking. Clara stood at the end of the dim corridor, half-shadowed by the archway, the soft glow of a nearby lamp outlining her figure. She didn't move, didn't blink. She watched Julian and Marguerite, as if the air between them carried a meaning she had not been invited to understand. Julian straightened immediately, instinctively stepping a fraction away from Marguerite. The young cook lowered her gaze at once, her cheeks flushing in fear and embarrassment. The silence stretched, thick and uneasy. Clara approached with an elegance that made the narrow hallway feel even smaller. "I came to find you," she said quietly to Julian. "I did not expect to find this." Her eyes flicked to Marguerite in a glance that was not cruel, yet sharp enough to make the girl shrink inward. Julian tried to diffuse the moment before it hardened into something far worse. "Clara," he said calmly. Marguerite was only offering information she believed important. Clara's posture remained graceful, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her. "Information," she repeated softly. "A cook bearing private information for a count?" Marguerite bowed her head. "Forgive me, mademoiselle. I never meant to cause such offense." Clara didn't look at her. Instead, she kept her gaze fixed on Julian. "May I ask," she said, "what matter required the two of you to speak in hushed voices after midnight?" Julian hesitated, careful with his response. "Something she overheard. Something that concerned me." Clara's expression didn't change, but her breath caught in a quiet, restrained way. "And you trusted it?" "I trusted the sincerity in her worry," Julian answered. That reply landed more heavily than he intended. Clara's eyes flickered, not with anger, but with a quiet pain she tried hard to hide. She lifted her chin with practiced composure. "I see." Marguerite stepped backward. "I should return to the kitchen." Clara finally looked at her. "Yes, I believe that would be wise." Marguerite left with hurried steps, as if escaping a place she never wished to be seen again. Julian watched her disappear around the corner, then turned back to Clara. She stood completely still, her expression unreadable. "You think I'm unreasonable," she said after a moment. "I think you're surprised," Julian replied, "and I understand why." Clara nodded slowly. "I had hoped this evening would begin our future with ease and clarity. Instead, it has felt like walking through rooms where someone keeps blowing out the candles." Julian fell silent, unsure how to answer without deepening the rift. Clara stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I am not angry that you spoke to a servant. I am unsettled. Something in your manner is different tonight. Distant, and I do not understand why." Julian couldn't explain without revealing more than he wished. "I only needed time to think," he said. Clara studied him, searching his face for truth. "And did you find any answers in her words?" Julian hesitated again. "Not answers, only concerns." Clara clasped her hands before her. "Julian, if there is something troubling you, you must confide in me. That is what a partnership requires." He gave a careful nod. "We will speak tomorrow, I promise." She held his gaze a moment longer, then finally sighed with a mixture of disappointment and restraint. "Very well. Good night." "Good night, Clara." She walked away with silent steps, her gown brushing softly across the stone floor. Julian remained in the corridor long after she disappeared, feeling the weight of conflicting loyalties pressing on his shoulders. The next morning, the chateau stirred early with murmurs of what had occurred during the dinner. Servants spoke in cautious whispers, wary of repeating too much in fear of being overheard. Marguerite kept her head down and her work swift, avoiding anyone who might question her. Every footstep she heard behind her made her flinch, fearing the housekeeper would call her name and announce her dismissal. Yet no summons came, only the anxious quiet that comes before a storm. Late in the morning, Marguerite carried a basket of herbs toward the back corridor when she overheard two maids arranging linens. "Madame Beaumont was furious," one said. "She said she'd never seen such insolence." "And Clara?" the other asked. "She didn't say much, but she looked upset. You know how she is, gentle until she isn't." Marguerite held her breath, pretending to examine the basket until they moved on. Her heart beat quickly, but she forced herself to keep working. She knew she could only control the tasks in front of her. The rest was beyond her hands. Meanwhile, Julian met with his steward, who had arrived unexpectedly with documents requiring his signature. They discussed estate matters, but Julian's mind wandered toward the evening's events. Something Marguerite said kept replaying in his thoughts. After the steward left, Julian walked down the servants' corridor, ignoring disapproving glances. He sought Marguerite, not out of impropriety but necessity. He needed clarity, answers, confirmation of what she had heard. He found her near the scullery, washing strawberries in a basin. She jumped when she noticed him. "My lord," she stammered, stepping back. "Marguerite," he said softly. "I need to speak with you again." She looked around nervously. "Here? No. Somewhere quieter." Her eyes widened anxiously. "If they see me wandering again, I will take responsibility," Julian assured her. "Come." She hesitated, but eventually followed him through a side door into a small courtyard where the morning sun reached only half the stone path. The air was crisp, the space secluded. Marguerite stood with her hands folded tightly, as though bracing for reprimand. "Last night," Julian began, "you said more than you intended, but I need you to say it again. All of it." Marguerite shook her head. "My lord, I fear I misheard, or misunderstood. These matters, contracts, estates, they are not for someone like me to interpret." "Perhaps not," he said gently, "but sincerity matters more than social standing. What you heard may affect my entire future." Marguerite swallowed hard. "They spoke of guidance, of influence. They said you are kind, soft-spoken, that you could be persuaded to agree to whatever they wished, once the marriage united the families." Julian felt a cold tightness form within him. Marguerite continued quietly. "They said you would come to believe their ideas were your own, that you would gradually step aside, not forcibly, but naturally, without realizing what you had given up." Julian's mouth tightened. "And Clara?" They did not speak of her much, only that she would assist, that she understood what was expected. Julian closed his eyes briefly, absorbing her words. Marguerite grew pale. "My lord, I should not have said anything. If I misunderstood, I have insulted your fiancée, and if I understood correctly," her voice faltered, "then I have insulted her still." "You spoke out of concern," Julian said gently. "That is not an insult." Marguerite shook her head. "It is foolish. A servant should never involve herself in matters like these." "There are times," Julian said, "when truth rises above hierarchy." She blinked, stunned by his words. He had no time to say more. A sharp voice cut through the courtyard. "Julian." They both turned. Clara stood at the entrance, her expression composed but unmistakably wounded. Julian straightened. Marguerite stepped back as though burned. Clara approached quietly, her gaze shifting between them. "I looked for you. They told me you were tending to matters of the estate, and yet I find you here." Julian tried to keep his tone calm. "I needed to clear my thoughts." With her, Julian hesitated. "She provided important information." Clara drew a slow breath. "Information you believe over what my parents have told you?" "It is not a matter of belief," Julian said firmly. "It is a matter of prudence." Clara's lips pressed together. "You doubt us." "I am questioning things," he admitted. Clara's voice softened unexpectedly. "Julian, do you not see how this looks? You, alone in a courtyard with a servant girl speaking in low voices. People will begin to talk." Marguerite trembled. "Forgive me, mademoiselle, I should go—" Clara lifted a hand, stopping her. "No, if you have something to say to my fiancé, I would like to hear it as well." Marguerite froze. "Mademoiselle, I beg you—" "No," Clara repeated calmly. "Speak." Julian stepped between them slightly. "Marguerite has said enough. More than enough. I will not allow her to be pressured." Clara raised her chin. "Very well. Then perhaps I should speak." Julian braced himself. Clara's voice trembled only once on the first word. "Julian, is this how our marriage begins? With secrets, with doubts, with you trusting the fears of a cook more than the intentions of the woman you are meant to marry?" Julian's breath caught. "Clara—" "No," she interrupted gently. "Please, answer me honestly." He struggled to find the right words. Clara's eyes waited, searching for something she could still hold on to. At last he spoke. "I do not mistrust you, but I cannot ignore what I heard." Clara glanced at Marguerite again, and this time the hurt in her gaze was unmistakable. "You believe that my parents, who have offered you only opportunity and partnership, would scheme against you?" Marguerite opened her mouth to defend herself, but Julian subtly shook his head. She fell silent immediately. Clara exhaled slowly. I did not expect this from you. I knew you were thoughtful. I knew you were cautious. But suspicion. She stepped back as though she needed distance to breathe. Julian tried again. Clara, I only need clarity. I have given you nothing but clarity, she whispered. Julian felt the words strike deeper than intended. Clara composed herself with visible effort. We will speak later. Alone, not like this. She turned, her steps slow, controlled. As she walked away, Marguerite looked at Julian with wide, frightened eyes. My lord, I fear I have ruined everything. Julian shook his head gently. You have revealed something I needed to hear. Whatever happens next is not your fault. Marguerite nodded weakly, but her expression remained tormented. Julian intended to follow Clara, to calm the storm before it grew beyond repair. But before he could take a single step, a footman hurried into the courtyard, panting for breath. My lord, he said urgently, Madame Beaumont wishes to speak with you in the drawing room. At once. Julian felt the cold weight of inevitability settle over him. He turned toward the chateau, knowing this conversation could change everything. And Clara watched from the balcony above, her expression unreadable, as her mother waited inside the room. Julian walked toward the drawing room with slow, measured steps, aware that every servant who passed sensed the tension surrounding him. The chateau felt heavier than usual, as if the very walls were holding their breath. He paused outside the door, straightened his posture and entered. Madame Beaumont waited by the tall window, her posture proud and poised. The morning light touched her hair, but nothing softened the sharpness of her expression. She turned with a smooth smile when she heard him, though it did not reach her eyes. Julian, she said warmly, thank you for coming so quickly. He bowed his head slightly. Your message sounded urgent. It is, she answered, gesturing toward a chair. Please, sit. He did not. She noticed, of course, but continued as if the choice pleased her. I am concerned, she began, deeply concerned, and I believe you deserve honesty. Her tone was kind, too kind. Julian knew the Beaumonts excelled at pleasant conversation that masked deeper intention. What concerns you? He asked. Madame Beaumont clasped her hands elegantly. Last night you left the dinner table because of a servant's intrusion. A cook, no less. One who should have been nowhere near such an event. And instead of correcting the breach of protocol, you followed her into a corridor. Julian kept his voice calm. I believed she required immediate attention. She required dismissal, Madame Beaumont replied gently. A household cannot function if servants forget their place. Marguerite was distressed, Julian said. It seemed unkind to ignore her. Madame Beaumont tilted her head. My dear Count, you cannot let emotional impulses cloud your judgment. You are nearly a married man. Your focus must be on Clara and on the responsibilities that await you. Julian felt the faintest irritation, though he kept it controlled. I am aware of my responsibilities. I hope so. Her smile tightened. Because Clara is deeply shaken by what she witnessed this morning. I fear she feels secondary, invisible even. Julian stiffened slightly. I never intended for Clara to feel that way. Intentions are delicate things, Madame Beaumont replied, rarely enough to prevent hurt. She took a step toward him. She is sensitive, Julian, and she cares for you. The least we can do is spare her unnecessary distress. Julian folded his hands behind him. What do you propose? Madame Beaumont nodded approvingly. A simple resolution. Speak with Clara. Reassure her. Make clear that no servant, however frightened or foolish, holds your confidence above hers. Julian hesitated. The phrasing unsettled him. Not the sentiment, but the certainty behind it. And Marguerite? He asked. Madame Beaumont waved a hand dismissively. She must be reminded of her role. Nothing more. A stern warning. Perhaps a reassignment to quieter duties. I will decide after we clarify a few matters. Julian felt a ripple of unease. What matters? She turned toward the window. I must understand what exactly she claims to have heard, and why she rushed to you with it. The air grew colder. Julian spoke carefully. She did not accuse anyone. She simply feared I was unaware of something. Madame Beaumont looked back at him. Unaware of what, precisely? He paused. She overheard a conversation, Snippets she did not fully understand. And yet she ran to you, interrupting a formal dinner. Madame Beaumont's tone sharpened subtly. Surely she must have believed she heard something of great consequence. She believed I was being misled, Julian said quietly. Madame Beaumont went still. By whom? Julian met her gaze with steady restraint. She did not say. A long silence stretched between them. Julian, Madame Beaumont said at last, Clara's future relies on harmony, trust, and loyalty. Every successful marriage is built on those foundations. If a servant feels emboldened to challenge that foundation, it will cause nothing but disruption. Or truth, Julian replied before he could stop himself. Madame Beaumont's expression hardened ever so slightly. Truth, my dear Count, is too valuable a thing to be left in the hands of a frightened cook. Julian felt the words land with a weight he could not ignore. Madame Beaumont continued, her voice smoothing again. Clara cares for you. My husband and I only wish to protect what you and she will build together. I ask that you stand with us, not against us. Against you? Julian repeated. If you choose to believe the whispers of a servant over the intentions of your future family, she said simply, then yes, it may be seen as opposition. Julian felt something shift inside him, quiet but firm, a boundary he had not realized existed until she stepped over it. I appreciate your candor, he replied, but I will decide whom to trust. Madame Beaumont regarded him for several seconds, studying him as though reassessing a painting she had once believed flawless. Very well, she said softly. Then I hope your decision is wise. She dismissed him politely. Julian bowed and left the room, though his thoughts churned like a storm. As he stepped into the corridor, Clara appeared from a side hallway. She must have been waiting, but she masked it with a gentle smile. Julian, she said softly, may we walk a moment? He nodded. They walked slowly down the gallery, marble tiles echoing beneath their steps. Clara clasped her hands. I fear I behaved poorly earlier. That is not true. I only wanted clarity, she said. But when I saw you with Marguerite, it startled me. I understand, he replied. Clara looked at him earnestly. You do care for me, do you not? At least enough to confide in me. I do care for you, Julian answered. And I want to speak honestly, but I need time. Clara absorbed his words with a slow nod. Then take your time, but please, do not shut me out. Her sincerity touched him, though it did not erase his concerns. They reached the end of the gallery, and Clara paused beside a tall window. My mother worries for you, she said. She feels the servants treat you with too much familiarity. It could cause talk. Julian held her gaze. I value sincerity, Clara, from all people, not only nobles. I know, she whispered. That is what frightens me. He didn't know how to answer that. Clara stepped closer. I want us to begin our life with trust, but trust must be mutual. Julian nodded slowly. You're right. She reached for his hand. Will you dine with us again tonight? If you wish it. Her eyes brightened faintly. I do. He agreed, though uncertainty lingered. Clara offered a soft smile before departing to join her mother. Julian continued down the corridor alone, the silence pressing around him. Every instinct told him something was unraveling beneath the surface, something he needed to face. He turned a corner and nearly collided with the housekeeper, who startled and dropped a stack of linen. My lord, forgive me, she gasped. Julian knelt to help her gather the cloths. Has something happened? The housekeeper hesitated. The girl, Marguerite, she is troubled, and the other servants have begun to blame her for last night. I fear she will not withstand much more. Julian felt a renewed urgency. Where is she? In the corridor beyond the storeroom, my lord. She is gathering supplies. Julian set the linens back in her arms gently. Thank you. He walked quickly, his steps echoing against the stone. When he reached the storeroom corridor, he found Marguerite kneeling beside a stack of jars, her hands trembling as she tried to sort them. She startled when she saw him. My lord, she whispered, scrambling to stand. Stay, he said gently. We need to speak. She lowered her gaze. I know why you have come. I know everything I have said has caused trouble. The servants avoid me. The housekeeper looks at me with pity. And the Beaumonts. Her voice faltered. I fear they think I meant to ruin your engagement. Julian stepped closer. No one blames you for warning me. But they do, she whispered, and I do not know how to undo it. You did nothing wrong, he said. You acted with courage. She shook her head. Perhaps I should have stayed silent. That silence might have cost me far more than you know. Marguerite looked up then, her eyes soft and haunted. I only wanted to help, and you did. Her breath wavered. What will you do now? Julian hesitated. I must understand the truth, and I must decide what path lies ahead for Clara, for her family, and for myself. Marguerite nodded slowly. Whatever you decide, I pray it brings you peace. Julian's expression softened. Peace is a rare thing, Marguerite, but sincerity is rarer still. She blinked, startled by his tone. He continued more quietly. You are one of the few who has spoken to me without expecting anything in return. I value that more than you can imagine. Marguerite's breath caught. My lord. Before she could finish, footsteps echoed at the far end of the corridor. Julian turned. Clara stood partially hidden behind a stone column, her eyes locked on him and Marguerite, with a look he could not yet decipher. Clara stepped fully into view, leaving the shelter of the stone column. The light from the tall window cut across her face, revealing not anger, but something far more difficult to read, something tight and wounded beneath her composed features. Marguerite froze where she stood, hands pressed to her apron, as though bracing for judgment. Julian gave a slight bow of his head. Clara, she returned a stiff nod. Forgive my interruption. I did not mean to disturb you both. Her tone was calm, almost gentle, but it held a firmness that could not be softened. Marguerite lowered her eyes at once. Mademoiselle, I was only... Clara raised a hand. No explanations are needed. She turned to Julian. May I speak with you? Julian hesitated. His eyes flicked briefly toward Marguerite, who stepped back as though wishing the ground would swallow her. Yes, he said quietly. Of course. Clara nodded toward the end of the corridor. Julian followed her, leaving Marguerite behind, trembling in the quiet. Once they had walked far enough that only echoes remained, Clara stopped and turned to him with a steady, controlled breath. I do not wish to quarrel, she said. That is not why I asked to speak. I have no desire for quarrels either. Good, she replied softly. Then let us be honest with each other. Julian nodded. Clara clasped her hands before her as if grounding herself. You have been distant since last night? I feel it. And I fear I know why. Julian waited. You doubt my family, she said quietly. You doubt our intentions. He exhaled slowly. I only want clarity. Clara's features softened into something like sorrow. Julian, I have known since childhood that my parents can be ambitious. They want security, respect, stability. They have pushed for alliances before. They have guided me, perhaps too firmly at times. But that does not mean they would ever wish to harm you. Julian looked at her closely. Do you know what they discussed last night? She paused, choosing her words with care. I know they discussed the contract. They mentioned it earlier. They hope to help you manage certain affairs. Help, he repeated quietly. Clara nodded. Yes, help. They believe you carry more than you should, and they want to ease the burden. At what cost? Julian asked. Clara's eyes widened slightly, hurt flickering through them. You make it sound sinister. I do not mean to, Julian said. But I must understand the full arrangement. I cannot enter a marriage uncertain of its foundations. Clara's shoulders sagged, as if his doubts weighed heavily on her. Do you trust me? Julian hesitated, and even the momentary pause made Clara's breath catch. I trust your heart, he said at last, but I fear your parents may not share your intentions. Clara closed her eyes briefly. You think Marguerite told the truth? I think she told what she believed was true, and you believe her over us. That is not what I said. Clara opened her eyes again, and this time they held a sadness deeper than displeasure. Julian, she is a servant. She has no understanding of noble discussions. She may have misheard. Perhaps, he agreed, and yet something in her fear felt real. Clara swallowed hard. She admires you. Anyone can see it. That alone may color her perception. Julian blinked. Admire? Clara gave a faint, trembling smile. Women often look at you with admiration. You simply fail to notice. Julian did not reply. Clara continued, her voice low. I do not blame her for it. She is young, impressionable, and you treat the servants with kindness. It is natural she would feel protective of you. Julian's breath tightened slightly, though he said nothing. Clara stepped closer. But you cannot allow her fears to dictate your choices. You cannot let a cook's trembling whisper unravel everything our families have worked toward. Julian met Clara's gaze. You speak as though this marriage is a matter of strategy. Clara's voice caught. Because it is. For my parents. But not for me. She steadied herself. Julian, I have tried to be everything a future countess should be. Graceful, composed, loyal. But I cannot compete with doubts planted by someone who has no place in our world. Julian lifted a hand gently. Clara, no one is competing. Are they not? She whispered. He faltered. Clara exhaled shakily. Tonight's dinner. Join us. Let us sit together without secrets, without shadows, and let us speak plainly about the future. Julian nodded. Yes, I will. Clara's expression softened in relief. She stepped back, giving him a faint, hopeful smile. Thank you. She turned and walked away with quiet grace, though her posture carried the weight of someone who feared losing far more than she dared say aloud. Once she was gone, Julian leaned against the wall briefly, eyes closing as he tried to gather himself. Nothing felt simple anymore. He returned down the corridor toward the storeroom. Marguerite was still there, hands paused over her work, her posture small and tense. She lifted her head the moment she sensed him. My lord, she whispered, is everything worse? Julian shook his head. No, not worse, but complicated. Marguerite's eyes filled with worry. I never wished to cause any pain. You have not, Julian replied gently. You brought forward truth, whether misunderstood or not. It mattered. Marguerite swallowed hard. Clara, she will think I have intentions, but I do not. I never meant. I know, Julian said. Your heart is honest. Her breath stilled at the kindness of his tone. She lowered her gaze quickly, as though the words were too warm to hold. Marguerite, Julian continued, you must be careful. The Beaumonts are unsettled. They may seek answers from you. Or worse, someone may twist your words. She nodded. I understand. Do not speak of what you heard to anyone, he said firmly. Not even the other servants. Marguerite glanced up. Will you be all right? Julian offered a faint smile. I will manage. She nodded again, though her relief was fragile. Footsteps echoed suddenly from the far end of the hall. Julian turned. The messenger from the estate, a young man with ink-stained fingers and a pale face, hurried toward him with a sealed packet pressed tightly to his chest. My lord, he said breathlessly, your steward sent me. He begs you to come at once. He says there is a matter of your accounts that requires immediate clarification. Julian frowned. What sort of matter? I do not know, my lord. Only that he looked troubled. He insisted you must see the documents yourself. Julian exchanged a quick glance with Marguerite. Her eyes widened as though the last barrier between warning and truth had begun to crumble. Julian turned back to the messenger. Very well. I will ride there immediately. Marguerite stepped forward. My lord, forgive me, but is this about last night? Julian answered quietly. It may be. A silence settled between them, heavy, taut. I will return before dinner, he said, more to himself than to anyone else. The messenger bowed and hurried off. Julian turned to leave the corridor. Marguerite watched him, her hands trembling once more. My lord, please be careful, she whispered. He paused, giving her a reassuring look. Then he walked away, the sound of his footsteps fading into the distance. At the far end of the corridor, an elegant figure stood very still, half hidden behind a carved doorway. Clara's mother, watching him go, her eyes sharp with unreadable intent. Julian rode across the cold morning fields with the messenger beside him, the clipped rhythm of hooves marking his rising unease. The estate lay only a short distance from Château de Montreuil, but today the path felt unusually long. The wind pressed at his coat, pulling at his thoughts as insistently as the doubts that had followed him since the previous night. His steward, Monsieur Ravel, waited outside the manor office, wringing his hands in a way Julian had never seen. Ravel was a man of quiet order, always composed, always certain. Yet today his eyes carried strain. My lord, Ravel said, bowing quickly, thank you for coming with such haste. Messenger said you required clarity, Julian replied. What has happened? Ravel gestured toward the office. Please, inside, the matter is delicate. Julian stepped through the doorway, where a stack of ledgers and papers lay spread across the large cedar desk. The windows were half drawn, letting in only muted daylight. Ravel closed the door behind them, then approached the desk with nervous urgency. My lord, he began, I reviewed the recommendations Monsieur Beaumont made regarding the estate's restructuring. You recall he requested to examine the financial records. Julian nodded. He said he wished to advise me. He advised you, Ravel said carefully, in ways that nearly handed authority to him. Julian stiffened. Explain. Ravel motioned to a set of documents. These contracts were presented as estate improvements, adjustments to tenant agreements, land rotations, and vineyard partnerships. Straightforward enough. But here he pointed to a line at the bottom of a page. This clause would grant the Beaumont firm management rights over half your agricultural revenue. Julian's breath caught. Half? Ravel nodded grimly. And here, he continued, pulling another document forward, your signature would have allowed them to appoint administrators to oversee the workers, meaning they would decide all major changes. Julian tightened his jaw. These contracts were incomplete when I saw them. Completed, Ravel said. They would leave your control purely ceremonial, a title without authority. Julian ran a hand through his hair, pacing a few steps. His breath grew heavy. You are certain of this interpretation? I triple-checked the wording, Ravel said. My lord, you would not have been ruined, but you would have been eclipsed, controlled, gradually, imperceptibly. Julian's pulse throbbed in his temples. Marguerite's trembling whisper echoed through his memory. They spoke of influence, of guiding him, of him stepping aside without realizing it. Ravel cleared his throat gently. My lord, if I may ask, did you sign anything last night? No, Julian said quietly. Not yet. Relief washed across Ravel's face. Then nothing is lost, but you must be cautious, very cautious. Julian closed the nearest ledger, pushing it aside. Ravel, he said slowly, why did you summon me today? Ravel hesitated. Because this morning, Madame Beaumont's assistant arrived. She asked for copies of the proposed agreements. She insisted they were already approved. Julian felt something inside him go still, but they were not. No, Ravel replied, and that is why I feared they might be preparing to pressure you into compliance before your marriage. Julian sank into the nearest chair, staring at the papers without seeing them. A hollow feeling grew in his chest, not quite betrayal, but close enough to sting. Ravel continued, Forgive me, my lord. I know these matters are personal, but when a family seeks such influence, it seldom ends with contracts. Julian nodded slowly. He understood perfectly. Thank you, Ravel, he said. You did right to summon me. Ravel bowed. I serve you, my lord. Only you. Julian remained silent for several moments. His mind replayed every conversation from the past week. Clara's gentle composure, Madame Beaumont's unwavering confidence, the measured tone of Clara's father when discussing alliances. The puzzle pieces slid into place with disquieting clarity. He stood. Prepare a summary of the contracts. I will need them tonight. Yes, my lord. Julian left the office, saddled his horse, and began the ride back to the chateau. The sky had darkened with gathering clouds and the wind had cooled, but he barely noticed. His thoughts were too full. He arrived at the chateau in the early afternoon. Servants hurried about with trays and linens, preparing for the Beaumonts' return for dinner. The air stirred with discreet excitement. But when Julian dismounted and handed the reins to the stable boy, the movement of the servants faltered ever so slightly. Everyone sensed something. They always did. Julian stepped inside. His boots echoed through the main corridor, passing portraits of long-departed counts and countesses who seemed to watch him with silent judgment. He turned toward the service hall, drawn by an instinct he didn't bother naming anymore. Marguerite was in the linen room, folding napkins with slow, delicate care. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, her movements small, as though wishing to take up as little space as possible. She didn't notice him at first. Marguerite! She jumped, nearly dropping the linen. My lord! Her voice broke with a mixture of surprise and worry. You have returned. I have. She studied his face anxiously. Is everything... Did the steward... You were right, Julian said softly. Marguerite froze. Julian stepped closer. Not in every detail, but in essence. Your warning was not a misunderstanding. Marguerite's lips parted in a breathless whisper. Then, the contracts would have placed the estate in their hands, Julian replied. Not immediately, not by force, but by slow, subtle steps. Marguerite pressed a hand to her mouth. I feared it. I feared they meant to guide you into something you could not refuse. Julian's expression softened. You saved me from signing away my authority. You spoke when no one else dared. Marguerite blinked rapidly, trying to steady her breath. I only told you what I heard. You risked your position, he said quietly. Perhaps more. She lowered her gaze. You were kind to me when I first arrived at the chateau, the only one who ever asked my name. I could not stand silent. Julian felt something shift in him, something gentle and dangerous all at once. He exhaled slowly, trying to anchor himself. Your courage will not be forgotten. Marguerite shook her head. Please, my lord, do not speak so. I fear your kindness will be used against me. Julian frowned. Who would... He stopped. They both knew the answer. Soft footsteps approached. Marguerite tensed instantly. Julian turned. Clara walked into the room, pausing when she saw them. Her eyes flicked from Julian to the linen in Marguerite's hands, then back to Julian. There was no anger this time, only a quiet, fragile confusion. Julian, she said softly, I hoped you had returned. I have, he replied gently. She gave a faint smile. Then we will have time to talk before dinner. Julian nodded. Yes. Clara looked at Marguerite then, really looked. Marguerite dipped into a deep curtsy, nearly dropping the napkins. Forgive me, mademoiselle, she whispered. I did not mean to disturb you. You never disturb me, Clara replied softly. You only worry me. Marguerite's breath froze. Julian stepped slightly between them without realizing it, though Clara noticed. She spoke carefully. Julian, my parents have arrived. They are waiting in the drawing room, and they hope to continue the discussions from yesterday. His chest tightened. He fought the impulse to sigh. Of course. Clara studied him with quiet intensity. You look troubled. I have much on my mind, he admitted. Is it because of the estate matters? Julian hesitated. Yes. Clara stepped closer, lowering her voice. Then speak with me. Let me share your burden. I am meant to be your partner. Julian opened his mouth, then closed it. The sincerity in her eyes softened him, but so did the memory of Marguerite's trembling voice and the truth he now carried. I will speak with you, he said gently. After dinner. Clara nodded slowly, though her disappointment was visible. Very well. She turned and walked out of the room, her steps light yet heavy with uncertainty. Julian watched her go, feeling torn in ways he had not anticipated. Marguerite stepped backward. My lord, she is hurting. I know, Julian said quietly. Marguerite lowered her eyes. She fears losing you. Julian looked at her sharply. Marguerite. I meant only this, she said softly. Be gentle with her. Julian nodded. I intend to. She offered a small, sad smile. She is not unkind, only afraid. Julian studied her face. And you? Are you afraid? Marguerite hesitated. Yes, she whispered, but not for myself. Julian felt the words settle between them, trembling in the stillness. Then hurried footsteps interrupted the quiet. A footman entered, breathless. My lord, pardon me, Monsieur Beaumont requests your immediate presence in the drawing-room. He says it is urgent. Julian felt the knot in his chest tighten. Marguerite's hands flew to her apron. Please, please, be careful. Julian gave her a steady look. Do not worry. I will return. He left the linen room. Marguerite watched him walk away, her heart pounding. At the far end of the corridor, Monsieur Beaumont waited with an expression colder than the marble beneath his feet. Monsieur Beaumont stood rigidly in the doorway of the drawing-room, his hands clasped behind his back with such firmness that his knuckles blanched. His refined posture offered no greeting, no warmth, only an authority sharpened by years of commanding rooms without raising his voice. Julian slowed his steps, sensing the change in atmosphere before a single word was spoken. Count Darcy, Monsieur Beaumont said, in a tone that suggested Neither respect nor displeasure, only calculation. "Do come in." Julian entered the drawing room. The curtains were half drawn and the afternoon light settled across the carpet in narrow stripes. Madame Beaumont sat on the sofa, spine straight, chin lifted, her expression perfectly arranged. Clara stood behind her mother, hands clasped tightly at her waist, her gaze lowered as though she feared what this conversation might demand of her. Monsieur Beaumont shut the door quietly, then approached Julian with the composure of a man who rarely rushed and never repeated himself. "We must discuss an important matter," he said, "one that concerns this household and our families." Julian nodded. "I assumed as much." Monsieur Beaumont gestured toward an armchair. "Please, sit." Julian remained standing. "I prefer to remain as I am." Monsieur Beaumont paused only briefly, but enough to show he had taken note of the subtle defiance. Then he turned toward his wife, who gave a barely perceptible nod. Madame Beaumont folded her hands delicately. "Julian, we wish to speak frankly. There have been disturbances in this chateau, behaviors inappropriate, boundaries ignored, duties confused." Julian kept his voice calm. "If you refer to Marguerite, we refer to propriety," Monsieur Beaumont cut in quietly, "and the need to preserve it." Clara lifted her gaze, watching him with wide eyes that begged for gentleness. Julian inhaled slowly. "Say what you wish to say." Monsieur Beaumont gave a small nod of approval. "Very well, I will be direct. Servants exist to serve. They do not advise their betters. They do not interrupt meals, and they certainly do not hold private audience with the future count." Julian met his gaze steadily. "She believed something was wrong. She spoke because she was afraid for me." "Afraid," Monsieur Beaumont repeated, with a mild laugh that held no amusement. "That girl knows nothing of contracts or estates. She cannot interpret a noble conversation. Whatever she overheard was surely misheard. Her intervention was not only unnecessary, it was disruptive." Julian's jaw tightened. Disruptive or not, her intention was sincere. Clara stepped closer. "Julian, sincerity does not replace judgment." He turned to her. "And judgment does not replace truth." Clara winced slightly, as though the words touched something raw within her. Madame Beaumont sighed delicately. "We fear that this servant girl holds too much influence over your thoughts. You are a generous man, kind, trusting. But such qualities can be dangerous when misplaced." Julian felt the faintest burn of resentment. "Are you suggesting I am incapable of distinguishing sincerity from manipulation?" "Not incapable," Madame Beaumont said. "Simply vulnerable. You have no mother, no siblings, no close advisers apart from your steward. You are accustomed to managing things alone." "That is not a fault," Julian replied quietly. "No," she said, "but it makes you susceptible to those who offer concern as though it were truth." Julian's eyes narrowed slightly. "Is that what you believe Marguerite is doing?" Monsieur Beaumont stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I believe she acted out of misguided sentiment, perhaps admiration. Servants often form quiet attachments to their masters. It is common enough. But allowing such attachments to influence decisions of this magnitude is dangerous." Julian's heart thudded once, sharp and unwelcome. "Admiration," he repeated softly. Monsieur Beaumont studied him. "You are a young nobleman. She is a cook. Such girls often confuse gratitude with feeling. It is not her fault. But it becomes your responsibility to ensure boundaries are respected." Clara glanced away, her throat tightening. Julian remained silent for several seconds, then said, "What is it you want from me?" Monsieur Beaumont clasped his hands behind him again. "We ask for clarity and for assurance." "Assurance of what?" "That you will no longer entertain private conversations with servants," Madame Beaumont said. "That you will not allow their whispers to undermine our understanding, and that you trust the family you are meant to join." Julian felt the weight of the words pressing on him, steady and suffocating. "Trust the family you are meant to join." He looked toward Clara. Her lips trembled faintly as though she wanted to speak, but feared choosing the wrong words. "Clara," he said softly, "do you share your parents' concerns?" Clara's breath caught. Yes, I suppose I do. I only want our engagement to begin with certainty, not doubt." She swallowed. "And I do not want to compete with a girl who has no place in our world." Her voice broke on the last words. Julian felt the ache of them. "Clara," he said gently. Marguerite does not seek to compete with you. Madame Beaumont lifted her chin. Intentional or not, she interfered. Julian let out a slow breath. She warned me of something she overheard. That was all. Monsieur Beaumont stepped closer. Then answer me plainly, Julian. Do you trust us, or do you trust her? The question hung between them like a blade. Julian's heart thudded. He looked at Clara, her worried eyes, her trembling posture, then at her parents, who waited with practiced patience. His mind flickered back to the contracts, the nearly hidden clauses, the stewardship that would have changed everything. He met Monsieur Beaumont's gaze. I trust facts. I trust evidence. Monsieur Beaumont went still. Julian continued. I visited my steward today. He reviewed the contracts. He confirmed that they would have stripped my authority. Madame Beaumont's breath caught in the faintest gasp. Clara lifted a hand to her chest. Monsieur Beaumont's expression tightened, though he hid it quickly. That is an exaggeration, he said. No, Julian replied evenly. It is not. Then your steward has misinterpreted, Monsieur Beaumont insisted. He has managed my estate faithfully for 15 years, Julian said. He knows every boundary line, every tenant, every clause. He does not misinterpret. A silence settled so deep that even the curtains seemed to hold still. Clara whispered, Julian. He turned to her gently. I do not blame you. I know you meant no harm. Clara looked torn between relief and devastation. But you doubt my parents? Julian did not answer, and his silence said more than any words. Madame Beaumont rose from the sofa. If you believe a servant's trembling tale over our intentions, then perhaps you are not ready for a union between our families. Clara's breath hitched sharply. Mother, please. Monsieur Beaumont raised a hand to silence her. His gaze hardened with finality. There will be dinner tonight. We will speak then. And you will decide, Count Darcy, whether loyalty binds you to those who stand beside you, or to those who whisper from the shadows. Julian's jaw tightened. The warning behind the words was unmistakable. Monsieur Beaumont stepped closer, lowering his voice. If you continue to give audience to that girl, Julian, you will create a scandal neither you nor she can escape. Julian felt a flicker of anger rise. Quiet, but unmistakable. She has done nothing wrong. Appearances matter more than truth, Monsieur Beaumont replied calmly. And her presence at your side has already begun to tarnish appearances. Julian steadied himself. I will speak with her if I choose. Monsieur Beaumont's expression chilled. Then you risk losing far more than you understand. Julian met his gaze without flinching. I decide what I risk. Monsieur Beaumont studied him for several seconds, then stepped back with a smooth, controlled breath. Very well, tonight we dine, and tonight you will answer. Julian nodded once, then turned toward the door. Clara followed him a step. Julian, please do not let pride destroy everything. He paused, the pain in her voice stopping him more effectively than her words. Clara, he said gently, I do not act out of pride, only conscience. Her eyes glimmered with tears. Then let your conscience remember me. He hesitated, then gave a small, solemn nod. He left the drawing room, closing the door behind him. The corridor outside felt colder, though the sunlight still filtered in. Julian inhaled deeply, trying to clear the weight from his chest. He started toward his chambers, mind crowded with decisions he did not yet know how to make. He turned a corner and nearly collided with Marguerite, who stood frozen in the shadows, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes wide with fear and something far deeper. Marguerite froze when Julian nearly collided with her. Her breath caught, and she stepped back so quickly she bumped against the stone wall. Her hands clutched her apron as though holding herself together. My lord, forgive me, she whispered, eyes lowered. I did not mean to be in your way. Julian steadied himself and softened his voice. Marguerite, you startled me, that's all. Are you all right? She swallowed. I heard voices in the drawing room, raised voices, not loud but sharp. I feared... She hesitated. I feared it was because of me. Julian hesitated before answering. It was not your fault. Her eyes lifted to his with cautious hope. Truly? Truly, he said. But even as he spoke, he knew the truth was more complicated, and she sensed it too. A shadow passed over her face, a quiet acknowledgement of realities they both wished were gentler. My lord, she whispered, I know I have caused trouble between you and your betrothed. I never wished for that. Julian shook his head. The trouble existed long before you spoke. You only revealed what none of us wanted to admit. Marguerite's hands tightened. Then will they ask you to send me away? Not while I am master of this house, he said. Her eyes widened, not with boldness, but with a frightened gratitude. I thank you, she whispered. But you should not say such things before them. They will twist your words. Julian sighed quietly. They already have. But what matters is that you spoke truth. Marguerite nodded slowly, as though the words steadied her more than he knew. But she wasn't calm. Something heavier weighed on her mind. Marguerite, Julian said gently, why were you waiting in the shadows? Did something happen? She hesitated, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. The servants. They whisper. They say the Beaumonts mean to blame me for everything. They say I should run before I am pushed out. Julian felt his heart tighten. No one will push you out. But they have power, she murmured. Power I cannot fight. Julian held her gaze. And I have power to protect my household. Her breath trembled. If you protect me, you may lose Clara. Julian inhaled slowly. Marguerite, there are truths I must face, no matter the cost. Her eyes searched his face, fearful, tender, unsure. Then be careful, she whispered, for your sake, for hers, and perhaps for mine. Julian felt the weight of her words more deeply than he wished to admit. He stepped back, trying to regain his composure. Thank you, he said quietly. You have done nothing but speak with courage. Whatever happens tonight at dinner, I will face it. Marguerite nodded, though her expression remained clouded. Then I will pray for clarity. For all of us. She slipped away down the corridor, back toward the kitchen, moving quickly and quietly like a shadow trying to disappear. Julian stood alone, troubled by how much her trembling words affected him. He returned to his chambers to prepare for dinner. The servants had laid out a deep blue coat for him, polished shoes and silver cufflinks. He dressed slowly, sensing that this evening would shift the course of everything. The mirror reflected a man trying to hold his composure, though behind his eyes a storm built. When he descended the stairs, the housekeeper approached him with a worried look. My lord, the Beaumont family has arrived. They are waiting in the dining hall. Thank you, he said. As he moved toward the hall, he paused. Is Marguerite assisting tonight? The housekeeper hesitated. She is in the kitchen, my lord. I thought it best to keep her away from the guests. Julian nodded faintly. Perhaps that is wise. The housekeeper bowed and hurried off. Julian took a breath, steadied his posture, and entered the dining hall. The room glowed with candlelight. The long table was set with silver and delicate porcelain. Clara sat at the left end, her hands folded neatly, her expression calm but pale. Madame Beaumont watched Julien's approach with a serene, unreadable smile. Monsieur Beaumont stood near the head of the table, swirling his wine slowly, as though contemplating the evening like a strategist preparing for battle. Count Darcy, Madame Beaumont greeted pleasantly. Thank you for joining us. Of course, Julian said, taking his seat beside Clara. Clara offered him a soft smile, gentle, hopeful, yet tinged with fear. I'm glad you're here, she whispered. Julian returned a slight nod. As am I. The first course arrived. Servants placed plates carefully before each guest. The conversation began, polite, slow, controlled. Madame Beaumont asked about the estate. Monsieur Beaumont commented on the vineyards. Clara spoke softly about upcoming invitations. Julian listened, but his thoughts drifted between Marguerite's trembling warning and the steward's quiet confirmation, between Clara's earnest eyes and the Beaumont's polished manipulation. Halfway through the meal, Monsieur Beaumont set down his fork with deliberate calm. Julien, he said, we cannot avoid the subject any longer. Clara stiffened beside him. Julien kept his posture steady. Very well. Monsieur Beaumont folded his hands. We must know your intentions. Our families are at a crossroads. Trust must be rebuilt tonight, or broken. Julien met his gaze. I understand. Madame Beaumont added softly, we do not wish for conflict. We wish only for unity, for a future that benefits all. Clara clasped her hands, breathing slowly. Monsieur Beaumont leaned forward slightly. So we ask you plainly, will you continue allowing servants to meddle in matters they cannot understand? Will you allow their whispers to shape your decisions, or will you choose to stand with us? With Clara, with the family that seeks to welcome you. The room fell silent. Julian breathed deeply. I will always listen to truth, no matter its source. Madame Beaumont's expression flickered. Even when that truth comes from someone uneducated, someone who misheard, someone who may have motives you do not know? Julian shook his head. Marguerite had no motive. She sought only to help. Clara's voice cracked softly. Julian, please. He looked at her gently. Clara, I trust your heart. I always have. But I cannot pretend I trust the contract your parents prepared. Clara's breath hitched. Monsieur Beaumont stiffened. You question our integrity. I question the intention behind clauses hidden in footnotes, Julian replied evenly. Clauses that would take authority from me. That is not partnership. That is control. Madame Beaumont sat straighter. We intended only to support you. And yet your support would render me powerless, Julian said. Clara's hands trembled. Julian, are you saying you no longer wish to marry me? The question struck the table like a quiet thunderclap. Julian's heart tightened. He looked at Clara, the sincerity in her eyes, the fragility of her hope, and felt the weight of the choice before him. Softly, with a sorrow that felt like a wound, he answered, Clara, I believe our engagement is built on expectations, not affection, and I do not wish either of us to enter a marriage where truth has no place. Clara's breath broke in a faint sob. No, please, not like this. Madame Beaumont rose instantly. Julia, this is reckless. Monsieur Beaumont's voice darkened. You insult my family. Julian stood slowly. I speak only what I must. Clara reached for him with a trembling hand. I could have loved you, Julian, truly, if you had given us time. He took her hand gently, sorrowfully. I believe you, and I will always be grateful for your kindness, but this marriage would imprison us both. Clara's tears slipped silently down her cheeks. Madame Beaumont placed a firm hand on her daughter's shoulder. Clara, come. We are leaving. Clara shook her head. Not yet. Mother, please, But her mother guided her firmly from the table. Monsieur Beaumont followed, pausing only to give Julian a look that held disappointment and quiet fury. The door closed behind them. Julian remained standing alone in the candlelit hall, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of a life-changing decision fall into place. He exhaled slowly and moved toward the corridor. He barely reached the doorway when he saw the housekeeper rushing toward him, her face pale and anxious. My lord, she said breathlessly, I beg your pardon, but you must come at once. It is Marguerite. Julian's heart stopped. What happened? She has been summoned to my office, the housekeeper whispered. Several servants have accused her of impropriety. They claim she overstepped, and Madame Beaumont demanded her dismissal before leaving. Julian felt cold anger rise in him. Where is she now? He asked sharply. In my office, the housekeeper said. But she is frightened, my lord, very frightened. She fears she will be cast out before daybreak. Julian did not hesitate. Take me to her, he said. The housekeeper nodded urgently and turned down the hall. Julian followed at once, and standing in the shadows near the far door, Clara watched him go with tears on her cheeks and a look that was not anger, but resignation. Julian followed the housekeeper with quick, determined strides. The corridor felt narrower than usual, as if the walls leaned inward to listen. Every few steps, he caught murmurs behind doors, servants whispering, footsteps scattering. Marguerite's name floated through the air like a fragile, trembling thread. Everyone had heard, everyone had an opinion, and most opinions were unkind. The housekeeper stopped before a modest wooden door at the end of the servants' quarters. She hesitated, turned to Julian and said quietly, My lord, she is very shaken. I tried to calm her, but she fears dismissal is already decided. Julian steadied his breath. She will not be dismissed. The housekeeper gave a soft nod, relief flickering across her lined features. Then please go in, only you can calm her now. Julian opened the door gently and stepped inside. Marguerite stood near the small window, her back to the door. Her hands clutched the edge of the table, knuckles pale, shoulders trembling visibly. She wore her apron still, though the ties had loosened as though her strength had drained with them. At the sound of the door closing, she turned. Her face broke his heart. Her eyes were red, swollen from tears she had tried to hide. Her lips trembled, though she fought to still them. She bowed so quickly the motion looked like she was collapsing. "My lord," she whispered, barely audible. "Forgive me. I meant no harm, I swear I meant none." Julian's voice softened instinctively. "Marguerite, please sit." She shook her head, taking a step back. "No, no, I should not sit before you. I have done too much already. I have brought trouble on you, trouble on your engagement, trouble on myself. I should leave the chateau quietly, tonight if necessary." "You will not leave," Julian said firmly, closing the distance between them. "And you have brought no trouble upon me. Only clarity." Marguerite pressed a hand to her mouth to keep from crying again. "They all say I ruined everything, that I overstepped, that I wanted something I had no right to want." Julian frowned. "What do they believe you wanted?" Marguerite hesitated, her cheeks flushing deeply. They say I wished to draw your attention, to be noticed, to steal affection that belongs to your betrothed. They say I used the warning as an excuse." Her gaze dropped in shame. Julian's voice softened further. "Marguerite, do you believe I think that of you?" She didn't answer at first. She only lowered her head. "I do not know what to believe anymore. Everything I did has been twisted. I fear if I speak, I err. If I stay silent, I err. And now Clara—" She broke off, shaking her head. She looked at me as if I had destroyed her. Julian felt a painful tightness in his chest. "Clara is hurting. But not because of you. Because of the truth. Because our engagement was built on expectations neither of us deserved." Marguerite blinked rapidly. "She still deserves kindness." "She will have it," Julian said, "from me and from everyone in this house. But kindness cannot correct a union built on illusion." Marguerite clasped her hands to stop them from trembling. Then, "Your engagement truly is finished." Julian hesitated, and in that hesitation, Marguerite understood. She inhaled softly. "I never wished for that." "I know," he said gently, "but it was inevitable. The engagement was ending long before you spoke. You simply revealed the moment it was time to confront it." Marguerite brushed her fingers beneath her eyes, trying to steady herself. "Even so, Clara will blame me. Her parents will blame me. And if they demand my position—" Her voice cracked. "What will happen then?" Julian stepped closer, his tone steady. "Marguerite, look at me." She lifted her eyes, though it took courage. "You are under my protection," he said. "No one will dismiss you, no one will mistreat you. You are part of this household, and you have served with honesty and heart since the day you arrived." Her breath trembled. "But your reputation—" "Let me worry about that," he answered. "The truth has already begun to surface, and though it may cause discomfort now, it will save this estate from ruin later." Marguerite nodded, though her tears continued to slip quietly down her cheeks. Julian reached across the narrow space and handed her a clean handkerchief from the table. She accepted it with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she whispered. He offered a faint smile. "For what?" "For believing me," she said. "For not treating me as though I were a child who misunderstood everything. You listened. That is more than most would have done." Julian exhaled slowly. "Listening is how truth survives. And you have spoken only truth." Marguerite held the handkerchief tightly. "My lord, I do not wish to cause more trouble. If it would help the chateau, I could move to the lower kitchens, or to a distant post, even outside the estate. I am not afraid of hard work." "You will not be sent away," Julian repeated, firmer this time. "I will not allow your sincerity to be punished." Marguerite's eyes glimmered, not with pride, but with relief, too heavy to hold. Julian glanced toward the window. Dusk had begun to spread its first faint shadows. The day had been long, but a quiet steadiness settled over him. The confrontation was behind him now. The truth was out, and the decisions he had feared making had finally been made. He turned back to her. "Tomorrow, I will speak with the household. I will make things clear. No one will question your position again." Marguerite shook her head slowly. "My lord, the servants will not understand. They will think you protect me for reasons that are not true." Julian held her gaze for several seconds. "Then we will let time show them otherwise." Marguerite exhaled shakily. "You speak so gently, yet I fear gentleness cannot quiet them." "I know," Julian admitted, but gentleness and truth together can. She looked overwhelmed, as though his words were more comfort than she believed she deserved. Julian moved to stand beside her, his tone softening even more. "Marguerite, I cannot undo what has happened, but I can ensure you are no longer alone in this." Her eyes shimmered. "I have felt alone for so long," she whispered. "You are not alone now," Julian said. A silence settled between them, quiet, warm, steady, not forbidden, not inappropriate, only human. Marguerite bowed her head. "Then, what happens next?" Julian drew a breath. "Tomorrow, the Beaumonts will depart. There will be whispers, perhaps even scandal, but it will fade. Clara will recover. Her parents will find another match. And the estate will remain under my care." "And me?" Marguerite asked softly. Julian looked at her with calm assurance. "You will return to your duties, but with peace, with respect restored, and with the certainty that you acted not in wrongdoing, but in courage." Marguerite's lips parted in a faint, trembling smile. "I hope one day you will feel no burden from my words." He shook his head gently. "Your words freed me from a far greater burden." She closed her eyes briefly, letting the relief sink in. He moved toward the door, then paused. "Rest tonight, Marguerite. I will handle everything else." She nodded. "Thank you, my lord." Julian opened the door, and before stepping out, he added in a quiet voice, "What you did may have saved my future." Marguerite's eyes filled again, though this time the tears shone with gratitude rather than fear. When Julian stepped out into the corridor, the housekeeper waited anxiously. "How is she, my lord?" "Better," Julian said, "but she must not be disturbed further tonight." "Of course." Julian started down the corridor, his steps slower now, steadier. The air felt lighter, not free of trouble, but free of deceit. He made his way toward the grand staircase. The chateau seemed calmer, though still tense. Servants paused when he passed, unsure of what they were now supposed to think. Some bowed deeply, others averted their eyes. Julian ignored the murmurs and continued on. As he approached the upper landing, he saw Clara near the balcony alone. Her posture was fragile, her eyes still red, but no anger remained, only sadness. She turned when she heard him. "Julian," she said softly. He paused. "Clara," she clasped her hands. "May we speak, just for a moment?" Julian nodded gently. "Of course." Clara stepped toward him, her voice quiet and steady. "I want you to know, I do not blame you. I may have wished for another ending, but I do not blame you." Julian bowed his head. "You deserved honesty. So did you," she said. "And now we both have it." They shared a silence that was oddly peaceful. After a long breath, Clara whispered, "Please take care with that girl. She is kind, and I believe she cares for you more than she understands." Julian felt his heart tighten. "Clara," she gave a small, sad smile, "I am not blind, and I am not cruel. I only want you to be gentle with her heart." Julian swallowed. "I will." Clara nodded. "And I will rebuild mine." A fragile understanding passed between them, unspoken but real. Clara stepped back. "May your future bring you peace, Julian. And yours, Clara." She left him gracefully, dignity intact. Julian watched her go, grateful for her strength. The night deepened around the chateau. The Beaumonts prepared to depart with as much grace as they could muster. Servants began extinguishing lamps, and Marguerite remained safe behind the small wooden door of the housekeeper's office. Peace did not settle completely, not yet. But the storm had passed, and what remained was the quiet, before a dawn he had not yet dared to imagine. The sun rose slowly over Château de Montreuil, washing the corridors in a pale glow that felt softer than the night before. The Beaumonts had departed at dawn, leaving behind only the faint echo of carriage wheels and a silence that settled gently instead of sharply. The household sensed the change. Whispers quieted, footsteps softened. Even the air felt less tense, as if the very walls exhaled after holding their breath for too long. Julian walked through the main hall with a steadiness that surprised even him. The uncertainty that had weighed on his heart for weeks had finally loosened. There was loss in what he had chosen, of course, but a clearer freedom had taken its place. He had not slept much during the night, but the rest he found was pure, unbroken, earned. He paused by the tall window overlooking the courtyard. The morning light spilled warmly across the cobblestones, and he felt a moment of quiet gratitude. The estate was still his choices were his, and a truth he had avoided for far too long had finally been confronted. But Marguerite. Her name rose in his thoughts with the same quiet insistence that had carried him through every difficult decision. She had shown courage when she had every reason to stay silent. She had risked her position, her safety, her reputation, everything for him. And last night, when he left her in the housekeeper's office, she had looked so small and exhausted, as though fear had hollowed her out. He could not let the morning pass without seeing her. Julian left the window and made his way toward the service wing. Servants stepped aside respectfully, bowing or murmuring greetings. Their expressions carried uncertainty, as if unsure how the day should begin without the Beaumont's shadow. But Julian walked with purpose, and soon the whispers faded behind him. He reached the housekeeper's office and knocked softly. A moment later, the door opened just a crack, and Marguerite's eyes appeared in the gap. She blinked in surprise. "My lord," she whispered, I did not expect you so early." He softened. "May I come in?" She hesitated, then stepped back to allow him space. The room was small, neat, the faint smell of lavender still lingering from the night before. Marguerite stood near the table, her posture a mixture of relief and nervous restraint. She wore her plain work dress, hair tied in a loose knot, and though she looked rested, her eyes still held traces of yesterday's fear. Julian closed the door quietly behind him. "How are you?" he asked. Marguerite lowered her gaze. "Better, much better now. The housekeeper brought me tea at dawn. She said I should rest as long as I wished. I do not deserve such kindness." "You deserve far more," Julian said. Her breath caught and she shook her head. "My lord, please, I am grateful. But the others will think—" "I no longer care what they think," Julian replied simply. She looked up sharply. "You must care, for your sake. For your estate." "Marguerite," he said, taking a slow step toward her, "what happened last night revealed something far more important than gossip." She held her breath, uncertain. Julian continued gently. "It revealed what kind of person you are." Marguerite's brow furrowed, confused. "A foolish one?" He smiled faintly. "A brave one. An honest one. Someone who speaks truth even when it costs her everything. Someone who guards others without thinking of herself." Her cheeks flushed. "My lord, you give me too much credit." "You give yourself too little," he countered. Marguerite drew in a shaky breath. "If I had been wiser, I would have stayed silent. Your engagement would have ended regardless," he interrupted softly. "Clara deserves a match built on affection, not expectation. And I deserve the freedom to choose the life I want. But I would not have realized either truth without your courage." Marguerite blinked several times as though fighting tears. "I only did what conscience demanded." "And conscience," Julian said, "is a rare guide in this world. I am grateful to you more than I can express." Silence settled between them, warm, not tense. Marguerite clasped her hands together. "My lord, I do not wish to complicate your life further. I ask for nothing in return for what I said. Nothing at all. If you wish me to return to my work quietly, I will. If you wish me to move to another post in the house, I will. I only hope you will not regret your choices because of me." Julian studied her carefully, the delicate tremor in her voice, the earnest fear in her eyes. She genuinely believed she had disrupted his world. She had no idea she had saved him from a lifetime of silent imprisonment. "I regret nothing," Julian said, "except that you suffered for speaking truth." Marguerite bowed her head. "Your kindness humbles me." He reached out slowly and lifted her chin with careful fingers. She startled slightly but did not pull away. "Marguerite," he said, "look at me." She did. Her eyes were wide, searching, unguarded. "I want you to understand something," he said softly. "Your warning did not break my engagement. It opened my eyes. Everything I thought I wanted, everything that was arranged for me, was not chosen from the heart. You made me question what kind of life I wished to build, and more importantly, with whom." Her breath stilled. "My lord, please, you must not say such things." "Why?" he asked gently. "Because we are not equals," she whispered, "not in the eyes of society. You are a count. I am—" "A woman of courage," Julian finished. A woman who risked more for me than anyone else ever has. A woman who deserves more than fear and silence. Marguerite's eyes shimmered. You speak kindly, but kindness can be dangerous. People will talk. They already do. And, Clara, she will suffer more if she believes you care for someone so far beneath her. Julian shook his head. Clara and I reached an understanding last night. She knows our parting was not caused by you, and she told me something important. Something I cannot forget. Marguerite frowned slightly. What did she say? That you care for me, Julian said quietly. Marguerite froze. Her lips parted, but no words came. She stepped back, her hands trembling. No, she misunderstood. I never— You do, Julian said softly, and I have seen it. Not in words, in the way you look at me when you fear for me. In the way you speak truth, even when it costs you. In the way your voice trembled when you warned me to leave the dinner. That was not loyalty alone, that was affection. Marguerite shook her head, overwhelmed. My lord, please. These thoughts, they will ruin me. Julian stepped closer. I will not allow anything to ruin you. You cannot say that, she whispered. You cannot promise protection when the world stands against such things. Julian reached for her hands gently. She started, but then let him hold them, as though her strength drained, and she could no longer pretend she didn't want to feel the warmth of his touch. The world has changed, Marguerite, Julian said quietly, and so have I. I will not build a future on fear. I will not choose a life because society commands it. I will choose the life that feels honest. Her eyes filled again, tears slipping quietly, falling onto their joined hands. Julian, please, she whispered. You speak as if you— He took a steady breath. Marguerite, I love you. The words fell gently, without force, but with the weight of truth that had grown slowly, quietly, across every moment they had shared. He felt her hands go still beneath his. She stared at him, speechless, her lips trembling. You cannot love me, she whispered. Not in the way that matters. I can, he said, and I do. Marguerite shook her head weakly. But I am a cook, a servant. I have nothing. You have everything, Julian said. Honesty, courage, a heart capable of loyalty and compassion. Those are worth more than dowries, more than land, more than every polished conversation I endured, beside people who never truly saw me. Marguerite covered her mouth as another tear escaped. If the world knew you loved a servant girl, they would call you foolish. Julian smiled softly. Then let them. For once in my life, I would like to be foolish in the right way. Marguerite let out a breath between a laugh and a sob. You speak as if you are already certain. I am, he said. He reached for her cheek, wiping a tear gently with his thumb. Marguerite, he continued, voice low and full of warmth. I see you. I see your kindness, your courage, the way you carry your burdens in silence. And I want you by my side, not as a servant, but as the woman who changed everything for me. Her throat worked as she tried to form words. My lord, I don't know what to say. I never imagined— Julian took both her hands once more, steady and sure. Then say only what your heart tells you. Marguerite met his gaze, the last barrier in her expression falling away completely. My heart, she whispered, my heart belongs to you. It has from the moment you showed kindness where no one else bothered. I tried not to feel it. I tried to bury it. But I cannot deny what is true. Julian smiled, genuine, full of quiet joy. She continued in a trembling voice. I love you. I love you more than I should, more than I ever dared. Julian drew a slow breath, his chest warming with profound relief. He stepped closer, letting his forehead rest gently against hers. There is no should in this, he murmured. Only truth. Marguerite closed her eyes, letting the moment wash through her. For the first time since she arrived at the chateau, she felt seen, not as a servant, not as a burden, not as someone who must shrink to survive, but as a woman whose heart mattered. Julian pulled back just enough to see her face. Come, he said tenderly. Walk with me. I want the household to know you are not hiding, that you are under my protection, and that you are the reason I stand free. Marguerite hesitated. Julian, please, they will talk. Let them talk, he said with a gentle smile. I would rather be judged for loving someone worthy than praised for a future built on emptiness. She finally nodded. Julian opened the door and offered his hand. Marguerite placed hers in it, still trembling but trusting. They stepped into the corridor together. Every servant who passed lowered their gaze, unsure of what they were seeing, but none dared whisper. The air around Julian carried authority, but also a peace that had not been present for months. He led Marguerite through the chateau, past the windows glowing with morning sunlight, past the portraits of ancestors who had lived lives of duty rather than truth. He stopped only when they reached the small courtyard where they first spoke honestly. Marguerite looked up at him, eyes glistening. "Julian," she said softly, "what happens now?" He lifted her hand, holding it with quiet reverence. "Now," he said, "we build a future that belongs to us." Her lips parted in astonishment. "Us?" "Yes," Julian whispered. "Us. Married, if you'll have me. Respected, protected, free." Marguerite pressed a hand to her chest. "Marriage? To me? Marriage to the woman I love," he said simply. Her tears fell freely now, not from sorrow, but from joy that seemed too large for her heart. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will have you." Julian gathered her into his arms, not tightly, not possessively, but gently, as though she were something precious and cherished. She rested her head against his chest, and he breathed into her hair, grateful beyond words. The courtyard was quiet, except for the soft rustling of the early breeze, and in that gentle silence, a new life began. A life built not by arrangement, but by choice, not by expectation, but by truth, not by society, but by love. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you like the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories, full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.